Actually, since sort of the title of the first book in Swedish, 1793, was kind of a placeholder title for me because I couldn't come up with a good title. So I thought, okay, the year 1793, cool. And the publisher said, yeah, I'm not sure if we could do that because there will be sort of cataloging issues with online booksellers. Once the title is a number, that could be a problem. Turned out not to. And when it came out and became what it was, then it was sort of obvious to everybody that, yeah, we should have a sequence of numbers. It will market itself, basically. But since they chose to change the title in the English-speaking world, which is the only ones that did that, I'm very excited to see what they will come up with, because I think they will have the pattern. It's the Wolf and the Watchman, so I think it will be the something and the something, and they should sort of start with the same letter. So they have their work cut out for them, and I'll be very excited to see what they will come up with. My name is Niklas Natt och Dag. I'm the author of a book called, in Sweden it's called 1793. In English the title became The Wolf and the Watchman. And the sequel, 1794, slightly predictable, came out in Sweden this September. That's who I am. Well, the creative process for me is I can really only speak about the first book, because the second book is sort of a tie-in to the original idea, so to speak. But for me, of course, it all started with reading and falling in love with reading, and that came at a very young age for me. I was a lonely child, and reading was sort of my comfort, and I never felt lonely when reading, and I felt that sort of you develop a relationship to the author of the work you're reading, and even though that person may be dead or very distant, it is an important relationship and surprisingly intimate. So from a very early age it was apparent to me that a writer, an author, is the best thing you can possibly hope to be, and I've never wanted to be anything else. But it took me a very long time. And as you do, when you want to write but have no idea what you want to write about, you become a journalist, which I did. And I did that for 15 years maybe. And by that point, I always knew in my heart that writing was what I really wanted to do with my life. But time passes, and it's like it's your little secret that this is who you really are. But when you actually try to put word on paper, you risk destroying that dream and proving that no, this is not for you. And that would have been really shattering to my sense of identity. So I was scared to start writing and waited a long time. And then this idea came up. I would do research mostly as an excuse not to write for many years. And I was 35, I guess, when I finally thought, now this is the time, I need to do this. And I started. And I was very happy, actually, sort of starting to pull off that Band-Aid. And like 4 months into that process, my wife came to me and said, we're having a baby. And then I thought, wow, I may be busy after that. So that sort of puts a deadline on things. And I hurried up as much as I could. I was working at this point, so it was sort of working at night and during the weekends. And I didn't really. I failed to meet the deadline, but I was finished with the first draft. Maybe when my son was 2 months old, and of course that first draft was a complete piece of crap. So there was a lot of work after that as well. Yes, my parents-in-law have a summer home close to Uppsala, like 25 kilometers in a small place. So we spent our summers here, and I came upon the English bookshop sort of just by walking around, and it was a bookshop, so I went in. And I sort of fell in love with that place because, first of all, you can see young people actually being there because they want to and buying books, which is something you don't see every day. And that's a development I'm of course really scared of, because I think that as sort of the literacy goes down, it's not only irritating to sort of an older generation who likes when you got old enough to sort of appreciate proper language, but I truly do think that if you don't learn the language good enough, you will never gain access to a higher level of thinking, and the abstract ideas. Every idea needs to be formulated in words. So if you can't use the words, that idea is out of bounds. But Uppsala English, it's the kind of place where I've talked to the same girl at the counter several times, and I think I never ever bought a book that she hadn't read already. And my wife, it's the kind of place you can go and say, I like this kind of books. And she will have read those books as well, and she will give you a recommendation, and you will buy that book, and it will have been the perfect recommendation. So, and those places, independent bookshops, it's always wonderful when you find one, and when you find one that's sort of obviously managed by somebody who comes from sort of infatuation with books, not just sort of making money from it. And Uppsala English, it's really good. I bought a lot of books there. "1793" was my debut novel, I think when you're a debutante and you actually finish a script, you will be in a strange place where sort of it's part hubris and part shame. When one day you will truly think that the thing you've written is really awesome, and a few hours later you'll sort of read an excerpt of it, and then you'll think this is just horrible. But as you do, I sent it out, and nobody wanted it, which was of course quite a heavy blow at the time. But eventually I got the sort of the better kind of rejection, where you will have a personal letter and somebody will have a professional opinion of your work and say, we don't want this, but actually we had someone read it, and here's the report that we got. And they were very good at pointing out bad things. A particular sort of pitfall when you're writing about history is that it will be too much history. You go through the source material, and there will be any number of awesome anecdotes that you sort of feel obligated almost to put in your work. But that can only happen at the expense of characters and plot. So you will end up with sort of quite a boring tome. And I rewrote it. And since we were by then a family, that sort of complicated matters, because time management was an issue. And eventually it got to the point where I gave up. I thought nobody wanted the book, and I sort of reached the nirvana of rejection, when you think, well, yeah, at least I finished something that I was quite happy with in the end. Could be worse. It could have been sort of unfinished, or even I could have thought it was a piece of crap. But and then some stuff happened that sort of made it come out. So I'm very aware of sort of how unfair and the whole process. It's very easy, because if you get one rejection, you will ask yourself, if it was any good, why would this one person say it's not, and they don't want it published? And I mean, your sense of self isn't great at that point. Your ego is very frail, and you can sort of just blow on it and the whole thing comes down. So there must be any number of manuscripts out there who sort of got dejected by that first threshold and sort of just gave up. Well, let's see now. Well, I eventually got to sign a contract, and that was, of course, wonderful. It was the fulfillment of the dream of a lifetime. I would gladly have paid the amount I was offered to sort of get to sign that contract. And then, of course, I was terrified, because you will have your first meeting with sort of an editor and a publisher, and they will have things to say. Of course, if you would choose to sort of come out as a monster of integrity at that point and say, I'm not changing a word, it's a perfect diamond, the contract will be signed still, so they will have an obligation as well. But in reality, you're very cooperative as a debutante, but knowing still that there is some deal breakers in your story that you would really, really not want to change. And I was terrified that somebody would say, like, for me, chronology, it was kind of a weird thing in the book. And I was terrified that somebody would suggest I change that around. But they were wonderful. They said, maybe we think this and that, we have an issue with this thing in your book. And if you think so as well, now that we've sort of pointed it out to you, maybe you should think about the best way to change that. And everything they pointed out were things that I secretly thought wasn't that good either, but I hoped I was the only one. So I got to sort of work on it from there, and it came out. And that's another thing about getting published. That's sort of only the start of a whole new process, because suddenly you realize that the window of opportunity to sort of make or break your book is very, very short. It has a shelf life of maybe 3 months. And if it's not sort of incessantly marketed, some coincidence needs to happen during those 3 months that sort of pushes it in the correct direction. Otherwise, the book will starve to death on the shelf, and it will be gone. And that was your chance. But with that said, I didn't have any sort of... I was very well prepared for failure. I knew very well that it is highly unlikely to sort of make a living from writing books in Sweden. I had no... I didn't even think about the foreign market, because I thought that I've written a book on Swedish history. Why would it be of interest to anyone outside of Sweden, if even inside of Sweden? So my only goal was for the book to do well enough for my publisher to say, okay, you can write another book. And we understand that sort of the work you have to put into it is out of proportion to what you gain from it. But if you want to, you can. And I would have done that gladly. I would have worked nights and weekends again, just to sort of, it would have mattered a lot to me. But to me, I was lucky. And what happened was that, first of all, I was awarded a prize from something called the Swedish Academy of Crime Writers. At that point, it was sort of a problem, both to the publisher and myself, what to actually call the book. Was it crime or was it historical? In the end, we called it just a novel. And I answered a phone call on a Saturday, there was a guy who said, well, we have the honor of informing you that you have been awarded the Swedish Academy of Crime Writers Best Debutante of the Year award. And I was silent for a few seconds, and then I said, but I haven't written a crime novel. And we laughed a lot about that afterwards. I was actually very flattered that my work had any appeal, because I haven't read extensively in that genre myself. And I am of the opinion that that is sort of the cardinal fault you commit when you should not try to write genre fiction unless you're very well acquainted with that genre. Otherwise you just end up picking the lowest hanging fruit and you think that's really original, but it's not. So that was flattering to me, and that was the start. And then it got recommended on TV by Professor Leif G.W. Persson, who's a hugely popular media personality in Sweden. And basically, if he tells people to do something, they will do it. And from that point on, it sort of got really big in Sweden. Well, I never thought that there would be a sequel to 1793 because I never saw it as being successful enough to create a demand for it. So that was a self-contained story. And after a few months, it became apparent that I could be allowed to sort of stay in this particular historical universe that I really love, if I could come up with a continuation that was worth doing, that could sort of stand next to the first one. So I decided that it should be a trilogy. I didn't want to end up in a situation where it would be just a serial thing, because I don't think I could do that good. Every single one, after a point, everything would be more and more mediocre. And it would be like sort of washing the same red t-shirt over and over again, and it will get more and more pink. So I came up with a sort of a story arc concerning these particular characters that show up in the first book, and that will cover 3 books, and then it will be finished, and there will be no way to sort of continue from then on. But I was out shopping for my family, shopping food, and I got a phone call one day. This was sort of the summer before the publication of 1793 in Sweden. And it was an agent calling me who wanted to meet. And I thought to myself, why would I want an agent? Because I've already signed a contract. And he said, yeah, but we would like to try to publish this abroad maybe. And I thought, what? And I gladly signed that contract, thinking you're very welcome to your percentage of 0. And then they started doing the work, and it sold to 35 countries, which was very strange. But of course, there's a binary thing, because it allowed me to sort of work full time on writing, and that is, of course, bliss, wonderful. On the other hand, I would like the creative process to be sort of contained in a hermetically sealed bubble where what happens to your book isn't really important. There's a lot of distractions when you're asked to sort of do email interviews and so forth, and that takes time. And I don't want to sound conceited or anything, but if I do that, that day is kind of ruined for me. I have a difficulty getting back into writing. And if I'm not writing anything that day, I feel I haven't sort of the right to call myself an author that day. And it also feels like I've achieved nothing. So I will be sort of cranky that evening with my family, which is not a good place to be. And if you have sort of the slightest little seed of delusions of grandeur, that seed gets its fair share of water, and I believe that may be very detrimental to your sort of mental health over time. And worst of all, it may sort of metastasize into the creative process as well. But I'm very happy in retrospective that getting the first book published was such an ordeal, because I think I rewrote it 8 times. And this has allowed me to sort of see the difference between the first draft and the 8th draft. I was enormously happy that the first draft wasn't published. And also, I can look back on it as sort of a working victory. So if I put the same level of effort into the second, which I think I did, and that is out, and now I'm trying to do the same to the third, then that will be some sort of way for me to gauge the quality of the work, I hope. It's almost impossible for the writer. You can only try to do something that you really like yourself, and hope somebody agrees with you. But we'll see. As for the third one, I have no idea. I am approaching the halfway mark, and I have ample time, I think. I have more time doing the third one than I had for the second, because and they published sort of on a 2-year. It was obvious for me that I can't do it in 1 year. It's impossible. I write the first draft pretty fast usually. I think the second one took 7 months. Of course, then I was working full time. But then I need that other at least a whole year, and if I can, even more to do rewrites and editing, because I'm not smart enough to see the whole story arc. I need to produce a really bad first draft where all the shortcomings will become apparent, and then I can really start working. And the cool thing about that as well is that at that point you will see the flaws in your work, and you will have better ideas, and those ideas will they will create a ripple effect to the whole work. And you'll see, wow, if I change that, then there's a whole number of scenes that doesn't work later on in the book. I need to change those as well. And then you may be surprised and realize, wow, the ending, that's not the ending. This is the ending. And being surprised by your own work, I never thought that could happen, and it's the best thing in the world. Otherwise, being a writer would be extremely boring. You would have, the whole thing would be sort of perfect in your head, and you will just type for some months. So I'm looking forward to that. I am, but sort of the flip side of it, that now that I know that the first draft is kind of nowhere near where it will end up, producing the first draft is slightly, the motivation is more difficult, actually.